The email arrived with a smile in its punctuation, polite enough to pretend it wasn't holding a blade. Immediate separation, it said. Signed by the interim CEO, Claire Whitmore. No meeting invite, no warning, no conversation. Just a tidy paragraph that thanked me for my contributions and asked me to disappear by sundown. I stood there reading it twice, impressed by how something so courteous could feel so violent. I don't want to look at that email anymore. To be honest, right now I'd rather find a down comforter because it's so cold today. What's the temperature where you live if you're still here? Please leave your lucky number in the comments. I wasn't a junior analyst or a name on a spreadsheet. I was the compliance lead who built the controls everyone bragged about. I slowed bad decisions, stopped risky contracts, and documented what others preferred to forget. Claire, by contrast, wore borrowed authority like a tailored jacket, confident, crisp, and loudly allergic to breaks. She didn't argue with me. She erased me. Her follow-up message landed minutes later. Sugar on glass. It's leadership. I almost laughed. Leadership, apparently, meant speed without checks and silence without witnesses. Security showed up with a box. HR read from a script that used the word transition the way people use perfume to hide smoke. As I packed, I noticed how efficient the day had become without me. Decisions moved faster. Questions stopped. That was the point. Claire didn't need obstacles. She needed a clear hallway at HR's desk. I asked one question and kept my voice flat. This decision went through the board. Right. The room tightened. The representative stared at a folder that suddenly needed attention. A keyboard clicked without purpose. Somewhere. A printer hummed like it was trying to help. No answer came. Not yes, not no. Just air. I left when they told me to, outside. The calm finally settled in cold. Precise. Patient. If the board hadn't approved my exit, then the exit wasn't the story. It was the invitation. Before we continue, I'd like to pause for a moment. What you're about to hear is a fictional story, built on real professional experiences and situations, with some elements created using artificial intelligence to bring the story to life. I hope it leaves a lasting impression and gives you an engaging experience. And if you're feeling tired, please take some time to rest and take care of your health. I learned quickly that borrowed power talks louder than earned authority. Claire Whitmore didn't settle into the interim chair. She lounged in it, issuing decisions like refunds that would never hit her account. Meetings shrank. Approvals vanished. Anything that slowed her momentum was labeled legacy thinking, which was her polite way of saying inconvenient. The processes she cut were mine. Compliance gates, dual reviews, escalation paths I'd built to keep us alive during audits suddenly became obstacles to be stepped over. Claire called it agility. I called it gambling with someone else's money. When I pushed back, she smiled, the kind that never reaches the eyes, and told me speed was culture now. What surprised me wasn't her confidence. It was how fast legal followed. Our internal legal director started rewriting sentences the way you bend wire. Not enough to snap, just enough to fit. Temporary interpretation. He said, contextual flexibility. Words designed to look responsible while meaning nothing at all. The confrontation came without drama. Claire leaned back, folded her arms, and ended the discussion for everyone. I don't need gatekeepers, she said evenly. I need execution. The room nodded, like that settled it. Borrowed power loves an audience. I didn't argue. I didn't warn anyone. I went quiet, which Claire mistook for compliance. That was the moment contempt replaced anger, because while she was trimming safeguards, I was sending one email. No opinions, no accusations, just timelines, approvals, and signatures that didn't exist. It went straight to him. I went home with a cardboard box and a mind that refused to scatter. The box held notebooks, a framed badge, and a mug someone once gave me as a joke. What I carried mattered more. I had a complete internal map of how things actually moved, where approvals stalled, and which shortcuts had names attached to them. Calm followed me like a shadow, not relief, but something sharper. I set the box down and opened my laptop. Access logs lined up cleanly. Timestamps didn't argue. Emails asking me to temporarily bypass controls sat in neat folders. Each one answered with a documented refusal. I had calendar invites that vanished after meetings. Document histories showing revisions pushed through minutes after I said no. It wasn't chaos. It was a pattern pretending to be urgency. That was when I made one call. The board's executive secretary answered on the second ring. Voice low, already careful. I didn't dramatize anything. I listed dates, actions, and the order they happened. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she exhaled once and said, "Very clearly, the board never approved your termination." The sentence landed heavier than anger ever could. We stayed on the line. She asked me not to forward anything yet. "Bring it, don't email it," she said. Then she paused, checking something I couldn't see. Her tone shifted. "She's trying to clean this up." I refreshed my screen. Audit trails flickered. A file I knew by heart showed a new access attempt. Someone was touching records that should have been locked. I didn't panic. Panic is loud. I took screenshots, noted the sequence, and saved copies where they couldn't be reached. Dangerous calm is knowing exactly what to do and doing it slowly. When the call ended, the apartment felt quiet in a deliberate way. I looked at the box by the door and realized I hadn't left empty-handed at all. I had taken the truth with me, organized, time-stamped, and patient, and somewhere across town. Borrowed power was learning that erasing footprints only proves you were running already. I didn't need a clock to feel the pressure. The company itself seemed to hold its breath. The CEO was somewhere above the Atlantic, unreachable, while 5 hours of borrowed authority stretched in front of Claire Whitmore like a closing window. She moved fast. Too fast, summoning legal, finance, and procurement, as if speed alone could turn risk into legitimacy. The contract on her desk was the one I had blocked twice. Inflated pricing, a friendly vendor, and clauses vague enough to become traps later. Claire wanted it signed before the plane touched down. Once signed, no one can undo it. The internal legal director insisted, tapping the page like a countdown. Heads nodded. No one mentioned compliance. I stayed invisible. I didn't call anyone. I didn't storm offices or send warnings. Interference would have tipped my hand. And tension favors the quiet. Instead, I watched system activity from the outside. Tracing movements I knew by heart. Access requests spiked. Files opened that had no business being touched. Approval chains shortened in ways that left fingerprints. Claire thought momentum was protection. She mistook silence for absence. The truth was simpler. I had built the safeguards she was stepping over, and safeguards don't need permission to work. When a required review was skipped, the system noted it. When timestamps didn't line up, it recorded them. No drama, just math. The alert went out cleanly, triggered by a rule Claire never bothered to learn. It landed with the board, flagged and immutable. Phones started vibrating. Conversations stalled mid-sentence. Someone whispered, "Why did this escalate?" Claire's confidence cracked for half a second. Sharp enough to see, she looked around, searching for a culprit, and finally understood what the quiet meant. I hadn't left the game. I had simply stopped playing on her board, outside the glass walls. The building hummed on, unaware, inside. Borrowed authority began to sweat. 5 hours weren't gone yet, but they were no longer hers to spend. And that realization tightened the room more than any raised voice ever could. No one laughed, no one spoke at all. I was seated before anyone spoke, the room already tight with expectation. The emergency meeting had been called the moment the CEO returned. Coats still on chairs, coffee untouched. Claire Whitmore took the floor first, confident, prepared, telling her version before anyone asked. According to her, I was a problem employee, resistant, emotional, slowing progress during a critical window. She said it calmly, professionally, as if repetition could turn accusation into fact. The internal legal director followed, smoothing edges with careful language. He spoke about interpretation, discretion, Interim authority. Nothing concrete, nothing written. Just enough fog to make responsibility feel shared. I stayed silent. Silence. In rooms like that, is either weakness or restraint. I let them decide which. Across the table. The CEO listened without interruption. No notes, no reaction. His stillness changed the temperature when Claire finished. She folded her hands, satisfied. Legal nodded, relieved. The board waited for guidance, for tone, for permission. Instead, the CEO looked up and asked one question. Who approved her termination? He didn't raise his voice. He didn't add context. The sentence hung there, clean and dangerous. Claire answered too quickly. She referenced urgency, leadership discretion, operational need. Legal jumped in, citing precedent without documents. Words piled on words. But nothing landed. The CEO waited again. The pause stretched until it hurt. Finally, he asked for the record, the approval, the vote, the signature. Papers shuffled, screens refreshed. No one met his eyes. There was no minute, no authorization, no trace of consent beyond Claire's confidence. That was the moment the storm announced itself. Not with noise, but with absence. The absence of proof, the absence of authority. I felt it settle over the table, heavy and inevitable. I hadn't said a word. And yet everything had shifted. The board understood before Claire did. Silence wasn't protecting her anymore. It was closing in. No one objected. No one defended her. And no one questioned why the room suddenly felt smaller. As if borrowed authority had finally discovered gravity, and everyone present understood exactly who would be pulled down next after this meeting. I was invited back into the room without ceremony, as if nothing unusual had happened. I didn't thank anyone or apologize for existing. I sat, opened my folder, and placed it on the table. The silence welcomed facts better than speeches ever could. I didn't defend myself. I didn't explain motives or tone. I walked them through time, date by date, request by request. An email asking me to bypass review. A follow-up marked urgent. A meeting where approval was implied but never granted. Logs showing access after hours. Edits made minutes after refusals. The record spoke cleanly, without anger, without adjectives. Claire interrupted twice. "She's manipulating the narrative," she said, sharp and rehearsed. I didn't look at her. Narratives argue. Evidence doesn't. I slid the logs forward. The timestamps lined up like teeth. Legal clearance that never existed. Authority that was assumed, not assigned. The board leaned in. Chairs stopped moving. When I finished, I closed the folder. Not dramatically. Just enough to signal completion. The room stayed quiet. That was when the CEO turned his attention away from me. He looked at the internal legal director. Not with accusation, but expectation. "Did legal authorize this?" he asked. The question was simple. The answer should have been immediate. It wasn't. Seconds stretched. The legal director adjusted his glasses, opened his mouth, then stopped. He glanced at Claire. She nodded once. Too late. Paper rustled. Someone coughed. "I need to verify," he finally said. That delay landed harder than a confession. Verification meant memory was unreliable. Authority was improvised. Procedure had been optional. I felt the weight of it settle across the table. Cold and exact. Facts didn't need allies. They had already arrived, on time. And now they were waiting. No one rushed to fill the gap. No one argued anymore. I remained still, because movement would have softened it. In that pause, responsibility found its owner. The storm hadn't broken yet, but everyone could hear it gathering. Patient, methodical, and impossible to outrun. Even Claire sat silent. Realizing borrowed authority expires the moment facts stop cooperating entirely today. The room shifted when the CEO finally spoke again. Not louder, not faster, just precise enough to cut through the noise. He didn't raise his voice or gesture. He simply began removing assumptions one by one, like labels peeled off files that never belonged there. Interim authority, he explained, was not ownership. It was custody, temporary and conditional, and it came with limits Claire had chosen to ignore. He cited the clause calmly, the one I knew by heart, the one that restricted termination of critical roles without board approval. My role. He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at the table, as if daring anyone to challenge the language itself. No one did. Pages turned. The board members leaned closer, reading consequences they had never expected to face so personally. What followed wasn't shouting. It was arithmetic, exposure estimates, regulatory penalties, contract nullifications, numbers stacked quietly until the total crossed into 9 figures. That was when the room exhaled. The risk was no longer theoretical. It was documented, dated, and traceable. Claire tried to interrupt. He stopped her with a raised finger. Not unkind, just final. Your interim authority ends today, he said. No emphasis, no flourish. The sentence didn't need help. For a moment, no one moved. Then Claire laughed once, sharp and defensive. She pushed her chair back and stood. You'll regret this, she said. I'll sue. I was empowered to act. Her voice echoed more than it should have, thin against the weight of the record. The CEO nodded slightly, as if he had expected that response. You're free to pursue any remedy you believe applies. He replied, so are we. That was the controlled explosion. No chaos, no raised voices, just the sudden collapse of borrowed power under its own misuse. I stayed seated, hands folded, breathing steady. I hadn't won anything. I had simply watched authority return to its rightful shape, and as Claire gathered her things, still threatening, I understood something clearly. Power cracks the moment it mistakes speed for permission. And today, it had shattered quietly, exactly as it deserved. The collapse didn't arrive all at once. It traveled, methodical and unstoppable. Once authority cracked, consequences followed in sequence, each triggering the next. The internal legal director was first. An inquiry began quietly, framed as routine, but questions about side conversations and prior relationships surfaced fast. Conflict of interest stopped being a phrase and became a file. With legal under review, the contract Claire rushed toward lost its protection. Procurement froze it without debate. Finance flagged exposure. The vendor called twice, then stopped. Nothing dramatic happened. Systems simply refused to move forward. That's how real accountability works. It doesn't shout. It locks doors. One board member, who had watched everything in silence, finally spoke. Not in defense of principle, but survival. He asked where his approval had been recorded, whether his name appeared anywhere near the decisions in question. It didn't. He leaned back, relieved too early, already rewriting his own distance from the mess. The real moment came when IT entered the room. No announcement, just a tablet placed on the table. Access logs. Live. The CEO nodded once. Revoke interim credentials, he said. The command executed immediately. Claire's screen went blank, mid-sentence. Her email disconnected. Her access died where she stood. She protested, standing, demanding explanations. No one answered. The authority she had borrowed vanished faster than it arrived. Security didn't touch her. They didn't need to. The system had already decided. Then the final detail surfaced. A technician pointed to a timestamp discrepancy. Someone had attempted to alter logs earlier that day. Not successfully, but noticeably. The room absorbed it in silence. That wasn't leadership. That was intent. I watched the chain complete itself, calm and precise. No revenge, no theatrics, just actions meeting consequences. One after another. By the time Claire gathered her bag, the outcome was irreversible. Justice hadn't rushed in. It had arrived on schedule. Exactly as designed. I understood then that silence, documentation, and systems outlast personalities, and that the loudest collapse is often invisible, unfolding inside processes designed to remember everything, even when people pretend they can forget forever. Quietly, conclusively, I returned to the building without ceremony. Not escorted, not rushed, just acknowledged. My title was restored and expanded in the same sentence. Oversight and compliance lead. As if the company finally admitted what I had been doing all along. No applause followed. Power, when legitimate, doesn't require witnesses. The CEO asked me to stay behind after the meeting. The door closed. Not dramatically, just firmly. He didn't thank me or apologize. He said one line, measured and final. I don't need loyalty. I need breaks. I nodded. That was the closest thing to trust I'd ever been offered. And it carried weight. I didn't celebrate. I opened a notebook and outlined rules. Interim authority limits. Mandatory board sign-off for terminations tied to critical systems. Dual logging no executive could disable. Clear escalation paths that didn't rely on personalities behaving well. I wasn't building a shield for myself. I was installing guardrails for whoever came next. When I presented the framework, there was resistance, brief and predictable. Someone mentioned flexibility. Someone else mentioned optics. I answered with exposure figures, timelines, and documented failures that were still warm. Silence followed, then agreement. The vote passed immediately. No amendments, no delay. That should have been the end. But the CEO added one clause: retroactive application. Every interim decision from the last window would be reviewed under the new rules. A murmur rippled around the table. Accountability, it turned out, was contagious. Afterward, people stopped by my desk with careful smiles, recalibrating. I accepted none of it personally. Authority had finally aligned with responsibility, and that alignment changed behavior faster than fear ever could. I sat down, logged in, and saw the system respond as it should. Locked controls, clean audit trails, nothing flashy, just order. I wasn't reinstated to be comfortable. I was reinstated to be effective. And the difference mattered. Borrowed power had been loud. Real power worked quietly. And it stayed. From that moment forward, titles meant less than systems, and silence meant more than speeches. Because consequences, once formalized, no longer needed emotion to enforce them at all now. I sat back at my old desk. The same surface, the same chair, but a different weight in the room. Systems were locked, permissions layered, alerts humming quietly in the background. Nothing looked dramatic. Which was the point. Order rarely announces itself. I didn't seek apologies or revenge. I rewired structure. Processes replaced personalities. Limits replaced trust. The company didn't need heroes. It needed constraints that worked when no one was watching. That was the real correction. People spoke to me differently now, carefully, measuring words. I let them. Authority, once formalized, changes behavior without conversation. I focused on documentation, thresholds, and escalation paths that required no courage to follow. As I logged out that evening, the sentence surfaced, sharp and honest. I wasn't fired because I failed. I was fired because I worked. It wasn't bitterness, it was arithmetic, before leaving. I saved the final file. A protocol for interim leadership transitions, written by me, approved, irreversible. If borrowed power ever tried to run wild again, the ending was already designed. Not loud, not personal, just final, forever enforced. There's one thing I learned from this story in large systems. Real value doesn't come from titles. It comes from whether you're willing to do the right thing when doing so makes you inconvenient. Doing the right thing rarely earns applause right away. More often, it brings isolation, doubt, and sometimes a door closing behind you. But those moments are exactly how you find out where you truly stand. I didn't win by raising my voice or chasing personal revenge. I stayed clear-headed, protected the facts, and trusted that truth has its own weight. That isn't just a professional lesson, it's a human one. When you defend principles, you're also protecting people who don't yet have the power or safety to speak up. If you were in my place, Pushed aside simply for refusing to compromise? What would you do? Would you stay silent to keep your position? Or would you accept being labeled difficult to keep a system from sliding into something worse? I believe many of you listening right now have faced that same choice. By the way, where are you listening from at your desk, on the drive home, or during a quiet moment at the end of a long day? If this story resonated with you, help it reach someone else who might need it. One subscription from you helps this story travel further. A like or a share might be the small push that helps someone rethink their next decision at work. If that feels worthwhile, stay with the channel. Together, we'll keep sharing calm, honest stories about fairness, courage, and doing the right thing when it matters most. This story was fully created and produced by our team. We do not copy or borrow content from any other channel. Thank you for staying with us and listening until the end.